We're going to try to go ahead and get started. I know there's some people talking out in the hall, but if we can get those in the room to sit down, let's go ahead and get the next panel going. As I started to say just a minute ago, we all need to be very focused on today's workforce issues. I think we have very distinguished panelists up today to talk about this issue and what we're dealing with. I first want to just thank the sponsors for the panel, AmWest Entertainment and the Pennsylvania HBPA. We're very honored to have Oscar Gonzalez join us once again as a panelist. He's been with us on a few occasions, and it's always been very informative and nice for us to have such a good friend so high up to be here with us. Oscar is the vice chairman of the California Horse Racing Board, and he previously served as the USDA Assistant Secretary for the administration and served from 2008 to 2016 under the USDA Secretary Vilsack. Also, longtime sponsor and very close friend, even brought me an autographed hat from Dale Brown several years ago. Will Ville with Horseman's Labor Solutions, one of our corporate sponsors, has consistently forever, as far as I know, has been an advocate for the horsemen. Small town Oklahoma, but he doesn't let that weigh him down, because he is literally from coast to coast advocating for horsemen, guest worker programs. Anyone in need of where to get H-2B visas or understanding H-2B visas, Will is a necessity to have on speed dial. Again, he works out of his law firm based in Oklahoma, but he's willing to get to you anywhere and everywhere. Another one, a good friend that I don't think needs any introduction to most everybody in this room, Remy Bellick, now with the Bluegrass Community and Technical College. Remy has been a long time advocate for workforce initiatives and now is an equine studies and workforce liaison under the Bluegrass Technical College, which does have the affiliation with the University of Kentucky based there in Lexington. But of course, he's most well known for his drawings and formerly the CEO for the National HBPA. So let's give your attention to them and hopefully we'll learn a little bit more about where we are in the workforce situation. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Eric, and good morning. It's great to be here. As Eric mentioned, I've been here on a few occasions on this very subject as it relates to immigration. As Eric mentioned, my background on the immigration front is quite extensive. Not only did I serve at a high level as Secretary Vilsack's senior advisor on immigration, so I was able to see kind of the highs and lows of immigration as it relates to agriculture. But more importantly, I go back 3 generations as a backstretch worker. My grandfather rubbed horses. My dad rubbed horses, as so did I, up until the time I was about 27 or 28. Worked for a variety of trainers in Southern California. But I remember as being one of the few English speakers on the backstretch while I was going through high school or college, sitting down across from fellow workers, having the opportunity to learn their stories. And whether it was helping them to translate taxes or some other paperwork, or helping them to better understand the kind of the nature of the community, it really hits home about how in some ways things have changed for our industry, but in some ways that they have not. I know we're in a room here with everyone who really understands the important role of backstretch workers and workers who take care of thoroughbreds, quarter horses, and others at farms and ranches. So I really want to just say thanks to each of you for really putting our workers top of mind. And we all know there's a lot of anxiety right now, as there has been. I think things are just a little bit more serious this time around because we are looking at the possibility of high numbers of deportations. And we just never know when those could hit or how they're going to hit. But what we do know is that there is a high possibility that they will be happening swiftly and rather aggressively. But I wanted to share an update on how I see things on the immigration front as it relates to equine workers. There is, I believe, some hope, but it really depends on how things shake out in Washington DC. I think in the next couple months, we'll see, hopefully things start to stabilize and we'll see some action on important legislation. But it's no telling about how immigration will be treated. There is an existing vehicle for equine workers that had not existed in the past. So about 2 years ago, Senator Bennett of Colorado came to a group of horsemen and asked what it would take to get equine workers inserted in the Farm Workforce Modernization Act. And so I did confirm that if that Senate version of the Farm Workforce Modernization Act is ever introduced, equine workers will remain in there. We do know that the primary vehicle, and my colleague Will Villy will elaborate on this, H-2B is the primary way that backstretch workers can get visas. But what being in this larger package, Farm Workforce Modernization Act, would also give employers in our industry the option to work alongside the H-2A programs. What has to happen in order for this to have any real traction is there has to be a dance partner, let's call him or her, for Senator Bennett. In the past, it was Senator Crapo of Idaho, but it just seemed like people really got cold feet. So there's no doubt that any indication of immigration reform is going to have to come from the White House. One, it provides elected officials the necessary cover they need, because we know that immigration is a really, really hot topic. What we could also see is if the White House is very interested on these deportations, it's very clear they're going to need the resources to do that. And it's only going to be through an act of Congress that those resources can happen. So there could very well be a compromise that in exchange for resources to carry out the deportation actions, there could be a trade-off with some, perhaps, let's just call them more positive actions that would impact workers. At the top of that list, without a doubt, will be the Dreamers, the 835 individuals who were brought to this country, born elsewhere, but that have some temporary protection. But if the courts rule, the Fifth Circuit rules the DREAM Act unlawful, then we'll see this 800,000 plus set of individuals put in limbo. We also know that the attention toward agriculture in general, with prices going high, with the possibility of tariffs, with the lack of market access, it could really intensify the need to give farmers some things to work with, including a very stable workforce. So again, it's great to be here. I look forward to elaborating on some other key points that may be coming up. We have time taking a question or two. But again, I just want to say it's always an honor for me to be in a room full of horsemen. I could probably do a 5-hour discussion on the state of California racing, which when I know Eric mentioned California, the room got really quiet. And I think you got to maybe to quiet up this room a little bit, just mention California, because I know all eyes are on California and what's going on out there. But I do my absolute best as the vice chairman of the horse racing board to do everything to make sure California racing is part of the larger and great story that we have to tell about horse racing. Thanks.
I think, Dennis, we're going to need some help over here with the screen.
Okay. Gotcha. Hello, everybody. Thanks for having us. This is, seems like it's always an important topic, but, given the last election and the tone of the election, it seems like it's taken on a newer, more pointed perspective. The issues are, there's two faces of immigration. You've got what I call reactive immigration, which is where you've got people here already. They're undocumented. There's not a set pathway to get them, to legal status. There's 11 million people, give or take, here in the United States right now that don't have lawful status. And so when we go to the tracks and we meet with people, our job is to talk to those folks and find out if there's a way we can untie the knot. And if there is a narrow pathway for some folks, not for everybody. That's why there's such a large number that don't have a pathway right now. That's the reactive side of immigration. The other side, called proactive immigration, that's where a trainer says, I need to make sure that my workforce is legal. I want to bring people lawfully. I'll put them on a visa program. When they come in, they'll get a social security card, they get a driver's license, their visas are multiple entry exits. They can go home and see their family and come back. We can keep them here for up to 3 years in most cases on the H-2B visa. With agricultural visas, there's no, the H-2B, it's a limited number. So you have to play. There's a game that I'll talk about in a little bit that you can usually beat the odds to get your people here. With the agricultural visa, which is for farms, breeding operations, there's no limit. That's considered a national security interest. So, the food chain is all important. During COVID, the whole world shut down. You couldn't get a visa to come to the United States except for what they called national interest visas, which were anything that touched the food chain. So however strange it was, anything that had to do with livestock was exempt from the quota. So we were able to actually stay functional during the COVID shutdown, just because we're considered so important to the national security. I'm going to start off talking about where we are right now, what has changed. I thought this is an article that came out last week. I thought Dale pretty well encapsulated the issues. Is that right now it's 30 days into a new administration. We know that the issue was primary importance in the election. We just don't know how much of it was smoke and how much of it's fire. And so we're still waiting to see. We're getting anecdotal evidence. We're hearing things. I haven't seen any large raids of any facilities. I know that there's ways that you can, limit the number of people that can come onto your track. If they don't have an actual judicial warrant, you don't have to let them onto private property. I know that there's been a lot of conversations at different tracks about who can come onto the track and try to do enforcement operations. But that's something to take into consideration very carefully. Whenever I'm asked in the public from reporters, I explain to them, you have to thread that needle that racetracks are highly regulated because of gaming. You have to be licensed. To be licensed, you have to have lawful status here. So we don't have a problem at racetracks. That's the official line. I'd say agriculture writ large, they may have a problem, but racetracks, there's no reason to come visit us because we're licensed and regulated. So that's the thread the needle I have to thread when I talk to folks. What Dale said is that, right now, we're hoping that they just come after the bad guys, but we need to make the visa program more sensible. And so, I always kind of looked at Dale as my sage, and he usually knows how to boil things down to the most common sense statement. What has happened so far in the last month is there's been a flurry of these executive orders. So one of them, the first one, which is that birthright citizenship, I don't think that's going to go anywhere. They'd have to completely ignore the 14th Amendment, which, came at the blood and cost of the Civil War. I don't think that they're going to make a whole group of second-class citizens out of people that were born here, but their parents didn't have lawful status, because that would be just terrible for the cohesion of our country to have a whole group of people here that have no stake in, being American. One of the interesting and I would say most far-reaching is the ICE has, it's expanded its reach. It's cross-deputized with FBI and with DEA. And so those agents are carrying out ICE priorities right now. And they've expanded something. There was one of the executive orders was it referred to a mass influx, which is an invasion of the borders. And what that allows is the president to take semi-paramilitary type actions with police force. And so that's done two things. One is it's expanded. There's always been something, Bush called it catch and release, where if somebody stopped at the border, you just can take them and, take them back, and you don't have to put them in front of a judge. And the law was always up until now, if you'd been here for less than 2 weeks and you're within 100 miles of the border, then you don't have a right to go in front of a judge. They just take you across the border and put you back across the border. That is now expanded to if you've been here for fewer than 2 years and it's anywhere in the country. And so what we're seeing is people that it's the burden of the individual to show that they've been here for more than 2 years. So if they're undocumented and they don't have really good paperwork, it's hard for them to show that they've been here for more than 2 years. So there's a lot of people, and the way they're getting them, I'll talk about this a little bit, is they're getting them driving. So if they don't have a driver's license, that's really how they're coming in contact with immigration. There's also a tip line. Actually, a employee of mine, she was born in the United States, but her sister was not. Her sister's 30, has 2 kids that are born in America, has never been in trouble in her life. Somebody called on a tip line on Friday and DEA came and picked her up. And it's a really interesting story because they apologized to her the whole time and said, we don't want to be doing this. We're DEA. We want to chase bad guys. We're sorry to do this. And what really kind of made me relieved is that when they took her to the station, they didn't fingerprint her. They did not institute removal proceedings against her, and they didn't enter into the system, and they let her go and said, just don't get in trouble. We're not looking for people like you. So, the things we hear are anecdotal. I can't tell right now. Americans are very fair-minded people. So the thought of these being these mass roundups it's still kind of a foreign concept to me. But between the expanding the ISIS reach and then the other one, which is part of that executive order, is to cross deputizing local police forces. So those are kind of the two big changes that we've seen so far. It's still really early, so we'll see what happens going forward. One of the most common sense and simple things a person that's here can do is to get a driver's license. There's 19 states that allow driver's licenses, even if you can't prove lawful status. I've talked to police officers and they all say the same thing. We don't want unlicensed people driving. We don't know who they are. We don't know if they're a fugitive. And so we have to take them into detention because they can't identify themselves. So if you do the simple act of getting a driver's license, the 19 states, if you're a trainer and you go between New York and Florida, or you go to any of the states that are listed on here, you just have to show 2 proofs of residence. One of them is a state track license. So if you're licensed in a state, that's one proof of residence. And then you show either a bank account or a bill with your name on it, and you can get a driver's license. That takes a whole big variable off the table. So I would never tell somebody to go to a state where they don't live and get a driver's license, misrepresenting themselves that they live there. But if they work there part of the year, then they're resident, and that's just a common sense basic way to protect yourself. The proactive part is the visa program, and I got to thank Eric and the HBPA and the gentleman sitting to my right for making our program actually. We're probably the most functional H-2B program. There's only 65,000 H-2B visas per year. They're broken into a fall half and a spring half. And if you move, you can have 2 different seasons because you have to show that you have temporary need. A temporary need is defined as being there 10 months left tied to a season. So if your season is the racing season and you move tracks, then you can have a set of fall visas and a set of winter visas, and you can keep people here year round for up to 3 years. The reason that's important is that this limited number of visas is 65,000. For the spring cap, there were 150,000 applications for 30,000 spots. So you got a 1 in 5 chance of getting picked in the lottery, which is not good. And if you don't get your workforce, that can be a real disaster. But in the wintertime, there's very little competition. So the way we make sure and make it through the lottery is that we file our winter visas for our horsemen, because then they get in under the cap. And then once they're here, we can extend them for up to 3 years without them being counted against the cap. And the reason I thank Oscar is back in 2011, immigration decided that, no, you need to take care of horses year round. We don't care that they go to different places. And all of our visas stopped for about 3 years. Jerry Crawford called me one day and said, do you need administrative help, or do you need executive help, or congressional help? And I said, oh, it's executive. This is an interpretation that's incorrect. They're not giving us our visas because they don't understand the law. And so he called me up and said, I've got a guy you need to talk to. He's just like you. You guys are going to be great friends. And it was Oscar. And so for the next couple of years, Oscar put together meetings at not the highest level, because Oscar always explains to me, you don't talk to the highest level people, you talk to the middle level people, because they're the ones that make things happen. And so we were able to, it was 2016, we were at a meeting with immigration, the headquarters, and the head of all business visas pulled me over to the side and he goes, hey man, I just want to let you know what they're doing is, he said BS, but he didn't say that. And we're going to fix it. And ever since then, we've been able to have our visas year round, which exempts us out of the cap, and follow that strategy of bringing them in the winter and then keep them here for up to 3 years. If they move, there's trainers in Maryland that don't move. So they just do winter visas. They get 10 months. They come in October, leave in August. But having a stable documented workforce, it's important for legal compliance, but it's also really important for the workers because the workers that come here without papers, they can't go home and see their family. You meet people that have been here for 10, 15 years, haven't seen their wife and kids because it's too dangerous to go back and forth. So if they can come legally, they get a social, they get a driver's license, and one of the last things that immigration passed before the Biden administration ended is they passed something called the H-2B Modernization Act, which allows H-2B workers to now get on a path to permanent residence, which takes about 3 years. So if you bring somebody in during the 3 years that they're here, you can get them over to permanent residence, which puts them on a path to citizenship 5 years later. They can bring their spouses and their minor kids, and then all of a sudden you've got a stable workforce that, they don't feel like migrant laborers. They're actually have a piece of the rock. They have an equity stake in the United States, and people that aren't stressed out are they're happier, better workers. And so, it works. The program works for the betterment of, everyone involved. And the reason I thank Eric and Oscar is that they've tirelessly advocated on immigration's behalf for us. And without the HBPA being involved, we'd be stuck in the lottery with all the other industries. And I work with other industries, and they, every other year they don't get their workers at all. So it's been a really great opportunity for the horsemen that, the HBPA is out there really advocating for them. The H-2A it's like I said, it's a visa that you can have without having to compete with any lottery. It's a little bit more regulated. You have to provide housing, workers' compensation. But, if you're faced with a choice of having a documented workforce or providing housing and workers' compensation, it's not the most unbearable burden to carry. And we work with a lot of horse farms across the country that, the breeding operations that they are dependent on. I think right now where we are as a country is that all the industries are looking at their exposure. I had a call from a farm in Kentucky yesterday that said they had a meeting, and they were, it's all hyperbole right now, but they were told that ICE is coming to Kentucky next month. So they're going through all of their employees and making sure that people are legally documented. And so, there's a lot of really unnerved businesses out there, and of course workers. And so what I explained to them is that there's a program. You just have to do the program. And so that's kind of where we are. These are just details on how the visa works. You have to pay them a wage that's agreed to. Because they're agricultural, you don't pay overtime. You don't take out federal withholding. So it's fairly cost-effective visa in the long term. There's rules to the road. If they leave, you have to let them know, and you have to let the federal government know. You have to provide them access to a kitchen. Basic common sense things if you want to, have people that are in good shape to work. I talked about this. This is the new program, the modernization program that it just makes the program much more workable for all the H-2s. They're allowed to stay for up to 30 days after they are done with their term. So essentially you can have them here for 11 months and then they need to go home and pick up a new visa. They can become permanent. All in all, it was a very important development just for the stability of the program, which I think more and more people are going to be going to over the next several years. We do a lot of athlete visas. An athlete visa is for somebody who's risen to a level of international recognition. What I really like about the athlete visa is that if you've got a jockey, that jockey, and they race with your stables, that jockey can have 5 grooms attached to their visa, and those visas are good for 5 years. And so if you've got a stable and a jockey races for you, then you can have up to 5 people that are working as grooms or whatever support personnel that you need. And you can meet your needs that way. It doesn't work for really large operations, but for, smaller operations that don't need a huge workforce, then it is helpful. Okay, so how to protect yourself if you, if immigration comes, and this has always been this way. I remember when ICE came to Evangeline Downs and they said, we're coming back and we're checking everybody's papers. And so the trainers were saying, what are we going to do? And so there's a very simple way to protect yourself as an employer. You have to keep a form. It's a federal form on everybody who works for you, whether it's a US citizen or international worker called an I-9. I'm sure you guys have heard of I-9s. Within 72 hours of a person starting working for you, you give them a list of documents that one, establish their identity, and two, establishes their work authorization. And what I always say to the trainers, if your I-9s are tight, you're all right. Just make sure that if you have your I-9s, keep it on every person. You're not the police. When they give you your documents, you give the document a good faith visual inspection. As long as it reasonably looks to be genuine, you are not allowed to go any further than that, or EEOC will come and hit you with a big discrimination lawsuit for what they call document abuse. And so that's the safe harbor for employers. As long as they've got their I-9s sitting in a file, if immigration comes, you got 72 hours to show them that I did my duty. I'm legal. I've done everything I'm supposed to do. They can't say, well, you didn't go and check for the veracity of those documents, because you by law can't. You have to just look at it. If it looks real and you have no reason to believe it's not, then you've done your duty. That's what I'm talking about. This is the EEOC. They call it improperly rejecting documents that reasonably appear to be genuine and belong to the employee presenting them. That is your get out of jail free card, because if you looked at them and they look good, then you're fine. And so that's what I tell the trainers, is just make sure that you keep that up. If they do go after what they call, if you knowingly employ people that are undocumented, they charge you with harboring. And the first time you're probably going to get a fine. The second time, they can pursue criminal charges. So it's just, it's incumbent upon the employee to understand that it's their responsibility to get you the documents you need to employ them. And if they don't have the interest in helping you stay out of trouble, then that's not somebody you want to employ. I mean, it sounds hard-hearted, but that's true. You got to protect yourself, and you just have to explain to them, you need to give me these documents, and you don't have to take a copy of them. You just write down the identifying number. If they give you a social and a driver's license, you write down the number of the social, the number of the driver's license. You don't copy the documents, you put it back in the file, and you've done what you need to do to protect yourself. So that's kind of the most important takeaway you can give to, trainers on the backside of the track who, might have issues with their labor force. There is one way for somebody who's undocumented to become legal. That's if they have a qualifying relative who would suffer harm if they had to leave the United States. And so a qualifying relative is a spouse who is a citizen or a permanent resident or a parent. If you have kids can't help you become legal unless they join the military, and then you can actually become instantly legal. And after 2 years, you can become a permanent resident. There's a couple of other exceptions, but they're very narrow. And so, when we go and we speak with 100 people, maybe 20 of them will have something that qualifies them. But, that's just what we have to deal with. And I think with that, I will turn it over to Remy, who is going to talk about what our most important selling point is when we ask the government for help with assistance with the visa program, is that we are doing everything we can to find Americans first. And here are the programs we use.
All right, thank you, Will. And I appreciate it very much. And Eric, thank you for the invitation. I'll start it off by saying that 25 years ago, it's incredible to think about it now, but 25 years ago, I moved to Lexington, Kentucky to run a national HBPA. And after that, now for the past 10 years, I've been with a Bluegrass Community and Technical Colleges Equine Studies program. But, it was wonderful to come to Kentucky. National HBPA was an amazing sanctuary for me after working in track management for about 18 years. And so I see a lot of friends out there, and it's good to be back. I'm here to talk about how we're training our domestic workers, the kids that go to high school programs, community colleges like ours, or four-year equine studies programs. And the thing I will say at the outset, first of all, is that, let me go to a slide here. I'll read this real quickly. The definition of a unicorn is a U.S.-born worker who doesn't require a work visa, who grew up on a family horse farm, has a great work ethic, is willing to work for a minimum wage with no days off, and is fine with living in a tack room and has no career or pathway expectations. That's the unicorn that we're all looking for, and that's the drawing I did for it. we can't find those unicorns. We find them once in a while. We all have a worker who came up through high school or something that works for you and has been with you for years and years. But the reality is that our industry, if we solved all of our problems, decoupling, medication reform, HISA, everything else, and we solved all of that, our workforce challenges is an existential problem that we have to face and have to raise up to the same level. Because if we solve all of that and we don't have the workers to muck out the stalls and groom the horses and everything else, we don't have an industry. We don't have economic expansion where you might have somebody who buys a farm and wants to add on to a barn and buy some mares and have some foals. They can't do that if they don't have people to work. So my challenge to the industry is that we have to, continue to face this problem head on, because it's not going to be solved with domestic workers alone, and it's not going to be solved with guest workers alone. It's only a combination of the two that is going to solve our guest work or our workforce problem or challenges, I might say. I wrote these PowerPoints a couple of days ago, so I might bounce through them pretty quickly because talking to a lot of you over the last day and a half, I've come up with some notes and things that maybe are more pertinent. But the dilemma that we have, like I just said, is that we have, domestically speaking, an issue where if we could have a successful national domestic workforce training infrastructure, by now we would have had it. If you add up all the high school programs, the 4-H, Bluegrass Community College Equine Studies, University of Kentucky, Equine Studies, all those programs across the country that are there to produce workers for you all, we would have a solution. That would be enough, but it is not, because we have a disconnect in our society with young kids coming to BCTC or elsewhere that have little or no experience at all working with horses or on a farm or in agriculture. They come to us after living in a city. And one of the #1 disqualifiers for a lot of our students, believe it or not, is not the work hours or getting up early in the morning, it's allergies. They come to us and they've had helicopter moms and dads who never let them outside, never let them have a dog or a cat or go work with a horse until they come to us at 19 years old and their heads explode as soon as they walk into the barn, and they so want to do this work. But they just, can't function because they don't have that kind of family farm upbringing we had so many years ago. So that's challenge #1 is how to take somebody who has had absolutely no experience working in a farm setting or with large animals as compared to a lot of our guest workers who already do. So that's a challenge on the domestic side. And so here I outline, we did some surveys with our students. 90% of our grads or students are gals or female workers. So not surprisingly, in Newmarket, England, 90% are young ladies. In France, 90% are young ladies. So my message here is that, a lot of us out here today, I've been in this business for a long time. Well, it's not the workforce we wish we had 30 years ago. It's the workforce we have today that we have to work with. And that sets up a lot of challenges, but it's an important thing that we have to do is to help educate our employers as to who are the domestic workers that we have today. And that brings up a lot of different kinds of employer challenges. So one of the things is, of course, a living wage, access to affordable housing. I'll get back to that in a second. insurance coverage, and a couple of days off a week. You've all heard this a gazillion times from your workers, but that's the key thing. Now, let me step back for access to affordable housing. When I called a couple of our graduates who have been working on the racetrack side and on the farm side for a couple of years now, I asked them, what is the number one issue that you have that's going to chase you away from our industry? And to a person, it's affordable housing. So if we go back and do a little bit of math, average wage that we can afford to pay some of our workers is about $20 an hour, 20, 25 to be competitive, right? So that comes out to about $42,000 to $64,000 a year before taxes. That means that that their gross pay is going to be about $4,200 a month. In Lexington, Kentucky, a one-bedroom apartment is $1,047 a month. In Almont, New York, a one-bedroom apartment is $2,250 a month. Arcadia, California, $2,500 a month. In Tampa Bay, $2,000 a month. Hallandale, Florida, $2,400 a month. Newmarket, England, $2,000 a month. That's half or more of their salary goes into housing. And so in order to afford to work in our industry, they have to live further and further away from work. So now they're 45 minutes to an hour away to get to a job that starts at 5 o'clock in the morning or 4:30. And if one of them has a toddler at home, you know, imagine, if you will, trying to find somebody to come and take care of your toddler at 4:30 in the morning while you go to work at the barn. So these are the facts that we have to deal with, and I'm not here to give you guys solutions to that, only to illustrate that this is a concern, and not just for our own domestic workers, but also a lot of the guest workers who are here who can't afford to, in many cases, work in our industry. And part of that is also where our racetracks are placed. I understand that, you know, they're in locations that have become very expensive to live in, but that's a number one issue that I see out there that's a big concern. I've just talked about the, workforce we wish we had. And like I say here, while many of our employers benefit from the wonderful counsel of people like Will and Horseman Labor Solutions and all that, what we have to continue to push and to look at is an industry-wide national workforce education program that we can take to Washington, D.C. and to make sure that if we have any kind of leverage, which we do have in D.C., to put it to good use, to maybe someday get our own H-2 visa. If we had one that we could have developed that we can have for our own needs, because our needs in the horse racing and breeding industry are somewhat different that the H-2A and H-2B visas cover, that could help a lot. This is the lobbying that we can have in DC. $177 billion added to the economy every year through the equine industry. $2.2 million jobs, that total economic impact. $122 billion in salaries, wages, and benefits. 6.65 million horses in the United States. These are a lot of the American Horse Council stats, by the way. And we have 2 million industry volunteers, $12.5 million of acres of land owned or leased for horse-related purposes. So taking those kind of statistics and going to the decision makers in DC and saying, we rely on a mix of domestically trained workers, and guest workers. And by the way, all the kids who come to our school, 60 to 75 a year, 100% of them get placed into jobs. So we can, the regulators can't say that we're not offering the jobs to our own people. We are, and and they're going to work. The problem is retaining them for a long period of time, keeping them in the industry. That's the job we have to do as an industry, to give them a career pathway, an opportunity to move up, make more money and things like that, like any other business. But we have a good message to say in DC, to say that we have a special industry that deserves some kind of special recognition. Just talked about some of the things we can do. Another thing that I find a lot, we can also help ourselves on a state basis. So a couple of years ago, I talked to my friend Todd Mostaller, and we got together with the head of the Pennsylvania Horse Council, and neither of them had ever really been introduced or knew each other. But I would be willing to bet that in every one of our states, we might have a horse council that handles a lot of things like shows, 4-H, pony club, trail riding, eventing. And it's surprising how many kids who start off on that end of the business might be willing to come over to the horse racing side to, groom or exercise horses or work with a racing stable. So a lot of times we can create those alliances in our own states with kindred spirits, if you will. And another thing too is that we can work towards helping ourselves with simple things like creating a national strategy on working with the job search sites. So a lot of you might use, things like Indeed, ZipRecruiter, things like that, where, looking for possible candidates, people to come and work for on your racing stable or on your farm. But if we could have a national approach where, we can have a presence on all those major job sites just for our industry, and even have advertising on those sites that say, if you're interested in working in the horse industry and all that, click on this link and you can go to different training programs around the country and things like that. They even have ag or farm specific job search sites like Ag Hires and Farming Work, where you can find potential candidates for filling some of the jobs. The final thing I'll add too is, on the domestic side, domestic training side, we produce a lot of good, solid workers who go on to work for a lot of you. But the issue there is that their expectation is that after a year or 6 months of paying their dues, they want to move up, rightfully so. They want to move up to become a barn foreman or assistant trainer, and maybe someday with the promise of going out on their own. The problem there is that who's going to fill that spot that they just left, which is mucking stalls every day, pulling horses out. Those workers who don't have long-term career expectations, who are happy just to draw a paycheck and go home and pay the bills, that we have, a balance of low-skilled or non-skilled workers versus skilled workers that we have to juggle, that you have to juggle all the time. And that's an issue that we have to wrap our arms around, because we're not replacing those positions that are what we deem as entry-level grooms, hot walkers, landscaping on your farms or what have you. So those are the issues that we face when we send kids out to go work for you all. Last thing I'll say is we have to think outside the box, right? Because the solution isn't always going to be, just doing the same thing over and over again. It might have to demand from us an ability to pivot and to find a new way of addressing our workforce training and supply issues. The one thing I'll say is on this QR code, I found a really good resource for data, for statistics, is a document called the Kentucky Thoroughbred Farmer Report, which was developed by the Kentucky Chamber of Commerce and the University of Louisville College of Business. Uh, This is, I think the QR code here will take you to that. But it's a great resource as far as the statistics and data. They did a really good survey of a lot of the horse farms, trainers in the state of Kentucky. But it can also illustrate a lot of what we're talking about here today, about what the challenges are as far as workforce and some of the solutions that we can look at. So with that, thank you very much.
Yeah, and before we take questions, I'd like to call out Julio Rubio. Julio and I have worked together. This is our 20th year we've worked together. We've traveled to almost every track in the country many times, and I couldn't have done any of it without Julio. And the reason I say that is you can go to the four corners of the United States, whether it's Emerald Downs, Gulfstream, Belmont, Del Mar, and everywhere in between, and we walk the shed rows and people come spilling out of the barn saying, Julio, Don Julio, they trust him. And without that trust, there would have been no way to establish the relationships with the workers. And so one thing that the HBPAs, and we were able to do this because of Marty and Rick's vision, that they said, look, we're not going to just keep Julio in Kentucky because our trainers travel to the other states. Marty always said one of the best ways that we can show the effectiveness of the HBPA is to we're on the ground helping their workers out. And so without, if you can find people like Julio that can answer the questions of the workers who are here probably feeling fairly isolated, then you serve your workers in such a valuable way that it's probably one of the best things you can do to have a stable, well-feeling workforce.
And I also like to add that my colleague, Robert Hartman, is here from the University of Arizona Racetrack Industry Program, my alma mater, and Lonnie's here too. And so when I mentioned University of Louisville, I only did it because I had to, because they were on this report, but I'm a University of Arizona guy through and through, so. So I guess we're opening up to some questions. Yes, sir.
Yes, this testing 1, 2. This will be for Will. Since you travel all over the place and have the interaction with the backstretch workers, how would you compare the tracks out here, maybe on the East Coast to the West Coast, as far as employees on the backside that actually, if you could add a percentage to it, how many are the questionable ones that don't have proper status versus those that they're in good, they got their H-2 visas, that kind of thing? Do you see a disparity between the East Coast and the West Coast, and the strategies each would employ toward, getting there? The strategy is probably the same, but do you have a sense for that?
Yeah, so the Mid-Atlantic is the most highly regulated part of the country. If you're in Pennsylvania and your visa expires, they escort you off the track. Maryland, New York, both very difficult to obtain licenses. Now, there's something called reciprocity, where if you have a license in one state, then you can get a license in other states by just showing the license, and they don't check anything further. We're amongst friends, so I'll tell you, there are people on the track that don't have great status, and we work every time we come to try to solve those problems. I would say the states that the states that are the least strict about licensing have the highest proportions. Interesting. One of the most exposed states is Texas, which maybe is just due to its proximity to the border, but also I don't think they really license that tightly down there. California has a great workaround where if you get a letter from a lawyer that says that you're working on your immigration process, then you can get licensed, which always seems like an interesting concept. But the tracks that are the most highly regulated have the most legal workforces.
And do we have anything really in California similar to the HBPA that has like boots on the ground with that kind of counsel talking to the workers because it seems like if one state, Texas or California, and I'm sorry for hogging up the mic, if somebody else has a question, because this is of interest, especially for the California folks, because I don't have a good sense of what the percentages are of those that have, questionable standing. And as the government begins to apply its resources toward seeking and finding these individuals, you'd want to remove the anxiety by having a plan for each one of them, by knowing their particular status and saying, hey, look, I mean, because we're hearing a lot about, hey, self-deport,
Mhm.
because if they get your hands on you, they're going to process you. Sometimes, like in your case, they did not, which is great, but that was a line level discretionary call. That may not be the protocol that comes down. And if they do get a little more rigid, if they get you and they do deportation proceedings, you're off the books for 10, 20 years, right? I mean, you have regulated things that say you can't come back. So some of our counsel to the people who work with us might be, hey, self-deport for now, but build a pathway so they can get back, things like that. So I think strategies will be different throughout the state, but some are more vulnerable, it seems, than others.
Take
You wanna
that.
speak to California?
Yeah, thank you, Leonard. And by the way, thanks for making the trip out of here. Leonard is a prominent owner in the San Diego area and pulls together a nice partnership. So thanks for being here, Leonard. In answer to the first question about what does California have, they do have advocacy groups. There's the chaplaincy, there's a medical dental run through the California Thoroughbred Horsemen's Foundation, and then the California Thoroughbred Trainers. I think that they do a reasonable job, but nothing comes close to what the HBPA does. I mean, they transfer problems, issues, and then into policy and opportunities in way of either litigation or legislation. So no, California just does not, we just have a huge drop off, in my opinion, as, one of the commissioners, and especially now more than ever, what's needed are organizations like HBPA in every state, in every region, because if you care about workers, then you have to be able to tell their story, because quite frankly, workers are in some cases the best messengers, but they're so very limited. Not only do their work hours constrain them, but they also have limited capability. So it's the people in this room that have to continue to tell the story of workers in the way that you do, Leonard, back in California. So thanks. Yeah, well, thank you for being here. This is great. Yes,
Let me-
we'll
let
bring more
me-
people next year too.
Let me jump in on, on the connection between San Diego and the workers and good stories. So if you look at this photo up on the screen, this is a young man who came to us. This is going on 8, 9 years ago. He came from San Diego. He was light and he wanted to be a jockey. And we got him trained at our school to the point where he had to go out and do an internship. So I called a friend of mine, a trainer, Rudolph Brisset over at the Keeneland. And he said, send him on over. I'll put him on some horses, because he outgrew the horses at our school. He needed something more challenging. So a week later, I went over to the barn and asked Rudolph, how's David doing? His name is David Massad. He says, oh, he's doing great. I got him galloping a horse that he gets along really well with. And I go up to the track and I take this photo and I said, Rodolphe, that's a nice looking horse. You have David on. He says, yeah, he should be. That's justified.
Wow.
And so poor David went back and he started riding some fair tracks in California. And he said, I'm forever spoiled because I galloped Justify in his late 2-year-old year before he became a 3-year-old. But that's a great story. And that's really part of what we're doing here is workforce is a really challenging issue, but from where I stand, whenever we get a student that goes out and succeeds and comes back and says, I love doing this every day, that's, one of the things that we all do. We're paying it forward to the next generation, and hopefully they carry on the work that we're all doing.
Any other questions? Well, once again, great panel. Thank you guys both for being here.